What is up, everyone? I am glad you are here with us for episode 200 of the MMA Ratings Podcast. This is Raphael Garcia here with Schwan Humes. This is the first time we've ever been on video in probably like the 4 or 5 years we've been doing this show. Schwan, man, say hello to everybody. How you doing?
Doing all right. Just living in the wild, wild west out here. Half people got masks on, half of them don't. They're just doing whatever they want in Texas.
So everything's wide open. Are you going to get the vaccine at all or no? You planning on getting it?
I'm I'm supposed to, but I think they're going through like a scheduling, so I don't know how close I am to that list. I think right now they're still doing older people, so I'm towards the end of it.
I just got my first vaccine appointment for this Friday, and I'm telling you, I cannot wait until I get that second one in me because I'm going to be in the streets, Swan. I'm going to have bail money ready because I'm going to have to call you to come get me out of these streets because it's going to be out of control.
I'll make sure to have some money put aside for that.
Good stuff, good man. See, and that's how we do here over on MMA Ratings, and we're going to be talking about a couple of different things today. Obviously, we're going to be talking about this weekend's fights. We're going to be covering a little bit of ONE FC as well. That's on Wednesday, and talking about some other fights that have been announced in the last couple of days. And we will be celebrating our 200th episode at the end of the show. But before we do that, as always, I want to take some time to thank everyone who's listened to this podcast from episode 1 all the way episode 200. And you can always find our content across multiple channels. Going to MMA Ratings Net first and foremost, where you can catch us there, and hit up MMA Ratings Net on Instagram and Twitter for all of our social media content. You can find this podcast on YouTube at MMA Ratings, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Spotify, and Anchor as well. Myself, you can catch me at rgarcia_sports. Schwan Humes is there at Black Jordan Breen. And you can always check us out because we're talking about everything just from not just mixed martial arts, which we will be covering tonight. So, Schwan, let's go ahead and jump into it because I want to start with this Saturday's card first, where we got a big change in the main event where Marvin Vettori is finding himself facing a new opponent in Kevin Holland. So, originally, this was supposed to be Darren Till, and Till broke his collarbone, I believe, last week, and there wasn't a replacement scheduled. But Holland stepped in on short notice. I think he's going to be taking this fight on about 9 days total. So, Schwan, what do you think about this fight? And the big question that I had was, does Holland's performance against Derek Brunson 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, whenever that was, make this fight less interesting?
First of all, I think it's a better fight. I know Darren Till's considered more of a striker or world-class striker. I'm not sure I agree with that anymore. But Till is fairly one-dimensional in what he does. One-dimensional in his striking approach, fairly one-dimensional in his skill set. He doesn't really show a high level of grappling or wrestling, not offensively, maybe defensively, not offensively. So this is a better matchup. It's a better athlete. It's a guy who, even though he doesn't have really a defined skill set, can strike a little bit, can wrestle, can grapple, has kind of been able to show himself as a threat in all three ranges, whereas Darren Till has really only been a threat in one. So I think on paper, it's a better matchup just based on the skill set. As far as Holland's last fight against Brunson, I don't think that tells as much because Vettori's a big guy. He's strong, physical dude, but he's not really an overwhelming athlete. He's not really a guy who can like just take you down at will and control you. And most of the guys he's taken down and controlled and kind of roughed up, they've been average to maybe a little bit above average athletes. It hasn't been anybody really spectacular. I mean, he took Israel Adesanya down once or twice, but he didn't really do any damage. He didn't really control him. He didn't really submit him. He didn't do anything of that stuff. Really couldn't dictate pace to him. And against the other guys he faced, they were kind of second, third-ish tier type fighters. So against Brunson's one of the better athletes in the division. He's one of the more experienced fighters. Even though I don't think he has great IQ, the fact of the matter is he's very experienced. He's only lost to the best. He's one of the better athletes. He's a guy who can fight for control. When he's smart, he fights for control, tries to control pace in exchanges, and can just dictate things. I don't think Vettori can do that. So what Brunson was able to do, Vittori's more better all around, but he's not going to take Holland down and just control him. He's not going to put him up against the cage and control him for 5 rounds. He's not going to take him down the ground and control him for 5 rounds. He's going to have a lot more trouble getting into those positions than Brunson did. Vittori's not as big a hitter. He's not as good a wrestler. He's not as good an athlete. So I fully expect it to be kind of a back-and-forth fight. That fight against Brunson, I don't think really has any impact on the fight against Vettori. In fact, this should be an easier fight for Holland based on experience and resume, I think.
So something that stood out to me from his last performance with Brunson, and a lot of people were talking about his penchant to be talking during the fight, and it didn't look good on him as he's clearly losing the fight. That he's joking around. It didn't seem like he had an onus on him to do something to change the situation. If he finds himself in that same position on Saturday where he's down, clear on the cards, 4 rounds to none, 5 rounds to none, and he behaves in the same manner, do you think that that will badly damage his position in the eyes of Dana White or matchmakers across the UFC?
I don't think it matters. The fact the point is he draws attention. There's people who are big fans of his. There's people who are hate him and think he's not well schooled enough. He's not professional enough. And there's the classical technician kind of analysts who are like, he's not a very good fighter technically. So he's polarizing. He's getting a rise out of people. He was talking and he wasn't winning, but people were tweeting about him talking, not winning. So he gets attention, he draws eyes, he draws interest. It doesn't matter if Dana likes him or not. If he draws eyes and draws interest, then Dana is going to continue to employ him and give him opportunities. Plus, he's willing to fight anybody. He's willing to jump in short notice. There's other middleweights right now who will win over Vettori would pretty much guarantee them title fights. And they're not taking it. Uriah Hall, even if he has a fight ready, he could take it. Derek Brunson, he just came off a win. Why not get another one? So Kevin Holland really has the most to lose because he was on a winning streak. He lost it in dominant fashion, and now he's taking on another guy who's got 4 or 5 fights and wins in a row. He beats Vettori. He's right back up the rankings in contention again. So he's taking a risk because if he loses, he's all the way at the back of the line. If he wins, he's right back close to the beginning of the line. So I don't think it really matters. I mean, as much as the only thing that exposed is that his team, in my opinion, hasn't developed him correctly because he didn't have any technical answers to get out of those positions, nor did he have technical setups or counters on the feet to avoid those positions. So all he's doing is talking, trying to get you agitated, trying to get you to maybe go for a finish so he can escape out the side. He didn't have an actual answer. So the only thing he could do was talk and look cool. And while it's unimpressive that he didn't have any answers, he couldn't improve his position, the fact of the matter is Derek Brunson was controlling him for large parts of the fight and really couldn't put any damage on him. Not really. And he couldn't submit him either. So is it impressive? No, but the fact of the matter is he still was able to go 5 rounds in the worst possible positions pretty much the majority of the fight. And Derek Brunson still couldn't finish him. So that says something about him still.
So I'm going to disagree with you there a little bit because I think that if Kevin Holland's performance turns people off and causes less people to want to watch him, that's going to have a long-term impact on his standing in the UFC. For me, for example, the minute that Till fell out of the fight and people started bringing up Kevin Holland as a potential replacement, based on how he performed against Derek Brunson, that didn't make the fight any more interesting to me. The only reason why I'm watching it is because I have to work the fight this weekend, so I will be covering it. But outside of that, I would have no interest in this card. Well, not the entire card, but especially this main event. And the main event sets the tone for the whole entire showcase. So if he continues to have the same struggles that he's having, where people are looking at him like he's a joke, I wonder if it's going to cause issues with his long-term value within the UFC as a draw.
I would agree. I see that, but I can't. There's maybe 3 guys in the division who can do that to him. I don't think Vittori's the athlete. Vittori's a better striker. He strikes in 3 levels. He puts pressure on you. He aggressively counters. He'll get momentum and throw volume. He's a more exciting fighter, but physically he's limited. He doesn't crush anybody with one shot. He can't. He's defensively, he's a liability. And I don't know that he takes the greatest shot. He's durable, but he's easy to mark up and beat up. So to me, even though Holland lacks an overall skill set, like a sharp skill set, I don't think Vettori is going to just take him down left and right. I don't think Vettori can just hold him down left and right. And he might be a better technical striker than Holland, but Holland's a better athlete. He's a little bit more aggressive and explosive in spots. I figure it's going to be 50-50 on the feet for the most part. To me, this fight is more exciting because Holland's in it, because Holland is generally an exciting fighter. Vettori's kind of a paint by the numbers, meat and potatoes guy. Darren Till's been exposed as a fraud and not as nearly as good as his looks and his charisma make him out to be. Now I think it's an exciting fight. It's an interesting fight. To me, it has more ebbs and flows because you have 2 guys who are generally in fairly exciting high contact fights who have enough skills in multiple areas where they can challenge each other repeatedly. So to me, it's a better fight. I don't think very much of Darren Till as a fighter right now, outside of his chin and his physicality. And Vettori, as consistent as he's been, he hasn't really beaten anybody who's really elite in the truest sense. And I don't really think he's beaten any really good athletes either. So this is it's interesting because I want to see how he faces against a really good athlete. Last time we faced him, he looked kind of good, but he lost. This would be the second best athlete, maybe the best athlete he's faced after Adesanya. Let's see if he's shored up some of those holes so that when he's facing a guy who's got some power and got some explosiveness, he isn't getting chipped up on the way in and on the way out. To me, it's a more interesting matchup now.
So the last thing before we move on to some of the other fights on this card is, if Vettori wins, do you see him getting a title shot? If not him, who else is there really left at 185? Because if you look at the rankings right now, I'm actually pulling them back up. He is sitting, I believe, at 5. He's sitting at 6. Darren Till is 5. So if he picks up a win here, do you think he is the number 1 contender, or do they go back to Derek Brunson?
He'll probably call for a title fight. I would think Brunson's wins carry a little bit more weight, or maybe they might have him fight Brunson to challenge for the title, because Robert Whittaker is going to fight Kelvin Gastelum. Whoever wins that fight is going to end up having to fight Adesanya. So somebody's going to have at least one fight in between. So most likely it'll probably be Vettori versus Brunson, or maybe Vettori versus Hall, I guess, possibly. That's why I was saying one of those guys should have taken this fight, because they beat him. Well, now there's nobody else ahead of you. You beat the number 5 guy. You beat another ranked guy. If Brunson beats him, Brunson's right there. Hall beats him, Hall's right there. Holland beats him, he'll be in the discussion, but he won't be considered a legitimate title contender, not right now. So I think whoever wins this fight is going to have at least one more fight, at least.
So I am looking forward to the co-main event probably more than anything else, where we have Arnold Allen and Sadiq Youssef fighting at 145 pounds. And these two guys coming into this fight have a combined, I think it's a 9-fight win. Well, 9-fight, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think it's a 10-fight in the UFC win streak. 11. 12. I'm sorry, 12. They've won a combined 12 straight fights in the UFC. And this is a big fight at 145. I don't think any man is really kind of ranked that highly. And we know that the rankings don't really mean too much. They're 10 and 11 right now. But I think this is an important fight for both men, because it sets the tone for the rest of the year and 2022 if they can find themselves in a title eliminator position. What are your thoughts on this co-main event?
The basic is just really, it's a prospect fight. I'm not always a big fan of these fights because one of these guys is going to have a loss, and most likely it's going to be a fairly impactful one because neither guy is highly ranked. So you lose when you're around 10 or 11. That's a big drop. And second of all, neither one of these guys, for the most part, has faced a guy of a comparable level of athleticism and skill. Maybe they had a guy who's got some skill, some experience, some athleticism, but rarely have they faced a guy who's really got all three put together. So it's like this is like the litmus test. Like, how good are you really? Because now you're facing a guy who's pretty much on your level, and the other guys have been maybe a step below, half a step below, and now you're facing a guy of your level. So we're really going to see if a guy has shown skill, how much skill does he have? He's shown poise. It's easy to be poised when you're faster, you hit harder, you got a better chance. It's easy to be technical when you can physically dictate where the fight happens. It's easy to be strategical when you're just so much faster that you can maintain your calm because you see everything coming, you can outspeed them. These guys are pretty much offset each other physically in one form or fashion. So now it's going to be, to me, a matter of who can really bite down and push through. Unless somebody just gets blown out immediately, it's going to come down to who makes the least amount of mistakes and who can handle the pressure of not having those easy entries or easy exits or easy escapes or easy setups that they're used to having. Because they've been like a step and a half better than most of the guys they face. Their wins have been fairly dominant. So now we're going to have to see what happens when you don't have a huge advantage athletically, technically, and strategically. Like maybe usually they're 2 or 3 steps ahead of somebody. Well, now you're probably going to be at the same level, maybe a step ahead. And when that gap closes, a lot of guys aren't the same fighter. So this is really going to determine who they really are and how we can really look at them as far as being potential contenders moving forward. Because it doesn't get any easier from here. Like after this, there's a huge jump up from 9, 8, 7. So this is kind of the gatekeeping fight between two guys who are prospects. Neither one's a gatekeeper, but since the division is such in flux and so competitive, these two prospects are going to be gatekeepers for one another.
Let's fast forward to the end of 2022, and are we in a situation where either one of these two men are fighting for a title? Not necessarily champions, but at least in the title picture, fighting for the belt?
I'd have to see at least 2 more wins from them. It really depends on how this fight goes. I mean, if I'm one of these guys wins, but and I'm their team and I see egregious holes, then I need time to really tighten that up. Because if you fight a lot, it's like sparring a lot of grappling a lot. You don't get better. You get better at the things you're already good at. You get more familiar. You get more cage time, mat time, whatever the hell you want to call it. But you don't get better because you're constantly fighting. You're sharper, but you're not any better. So if one of these guys shows egregious holes or takes a huge amount of punishment, which means there is an egregious hole in their skill set, you've got to go back to the drawing board. You've got to shore that up because a guy who was 10th or 11th exposed that hole and was able to punish it, which means a guy at 9, 8, 7, 6, or 5 is going to run through that hole and destroy you. So you got to eliminate that or you got to minimize that. It just depends how the fight goes. If it's a dominant win, maybe those guys get that 2 or 3 fights they need to move forward. If it's a very competitive win, then whoever wins, I think you need to go back to the drawing board and make sure everything is as tight as it possibly be because the margin of error against the higher ring guys won't be there. But then again, guys at UFC are, somebody could fall out of a fight. Hey, number 10, you want to fight for the title? Sure. They go take a career-altering beating and then never the same after that. But I would really like them to be more methodical so that you can make the most of the opportunity when it comes.
Good stuff. It's funny you mentioned career altering because I was talking on Twitter this past week and somebody brought up the fight that almost happened between Max Holloway and Khabib Nurmagomedov, and we're almost lucky that fight didn't occur because I wonder what Max Holloway would have looked like after the fact. I don't think he would have beaten. I don't think he would have won that fight, and I wonder what he would have looked like after facing what we know of as the best lightweight to ever compete.
Yeah, I mean, nobody thinks that. The coaching always talk from a position of strength, and I get that. You're supposed to encourage your athlete. You're supposed to support your athlete. Same in any sport. But you can't lie to them. You have to make them aware of the risk, or you have to be aware of the risk. And these fighters, these coaches in MMA, same thing with the coaches in boxing, they're braver than the fighter is. They'll let the fighter go through all this punishment because they don't want to lose, drop 2 slots. I don't want to go from number 5 to number 7. And not knowing that by letting them go through this beating, you are essentially letting the world-class athleticism or elite-class talent they have get beaten out of them. And once that starts going one direction, it never stops going. You can slow it down by developing your skills, your conditioning, your strategy. But once you start going the other direction, you never stop. You don't go back. You just slow the decline. And a fight like that against Khabib, knowing who Max is as the fighter, that's going to be a long, punishing fight. He's not going to give up. He's probably not going to tap. So he's probably going to end up getting hurt pretty badly.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Is anything else on this card on Saturday that stands out to you? For me, I want to see what Nina Ansaroff looks like coming back into the cage. She's facing Mackenzie Dern after, I believe, 2 years off.
Yeah.
And she's had a child. Her and Amanda Nunez welcomed their daughter into the world, I think, like in December of last year. But is there anything else that stands out to you for Saturday's card?
About that fight, just once again to reiterate what I said last week, even though Nina Ansaroff hasn't fought in 2 years, if Mackenzie Dern beats her, that is Mackenzie Dern's best win in the entirety of her career as a UFC fighter. Because most of the girls she's beaten have been, maybe good fighters, but struggling. Random Marcos, who else? Amanda Bobby Cooper. I mean, she's beat. Who's the girl Angela Hill fought recently? I can't remember her name, but another fighter who's kind of a middling type fighter. She's beaten a lot of girls who she's athletically superior than and able to physically dominate with punching power, physical strength. And when she fought Amanda Ribas, she got exposed. I mean, we already knew she wasn't a very good technical fighter, but she really got exposed for all her limitations and how much she lends in her attributes. So it's funny that in fighting Nina Ansaroff, a girl who hasn't fought in 2 years, you can't guarantee Dern will beat her because Dern's improved a little bit, but if she beats her, that's her best win. And it's ridiculous to think that a girl's been out of the sport for 2 years, and if you beat her, that's the very best win of your career. It wouldn't be the best win for Ansaroff, but it'd be clearly the best win for Dern. Dern's the better athlete, probably the bigger hitter, but Ansaroff's just a much better technical fighter. The question is, does she still have that fire? And how does she react if Dern is able to impose her will and when Dern cracks her in her face or she puts her in a bad spot? If she's going to react like she normally did, it's fine. If she's a half step off or a little hesitant, I expect a pretty impressive Dern win, but it all depends on what Ansaroff has. But if you go by activity, I probably have to go by Dern just because it's hard to pick somebody who hasn't been in the cage taking live bullets for 2 years. The only other fight I was interested in was Blanchfield versus Dumont. Aaron Blanchfield's, I think she's how you say her name. Aaron Blanchfield's supposed to be a big prospect. I feel like this is a showcase fight for her. Dumont's not a bad fighter, but she did lose to Megan Anderson pretty dominantly, which makes you know that she's not top shelf. So I think they're just using this fight to build Aaron and give her a kind of launching pad into the UFC to see if she can build some momentum moving forward.
Good stuff there, sir. And I want to turn our attention to Wednesday, which is a card that a lot of people aren't really talking about, but we should be talking about, especially with this main event where we have Demetrius Johnson is looking to fight, is looking to take the flyweight title, the ONE FC, ONE Championship flyweight title off of Adriano Morales in the main event of TNT's first presentation of ONE FC. And there's a couple of pieces about that I'm going to talk about. But from a strictly fight standpoint, does seeing Demetrius Johnson in this main event interest you at all, Schwan?
It's always going to have some kind of interest, just in the fact that, I mean, even though he's never been a high-profile fighter in the truest sense, like the biggest draw or anything, the fact of the matter is, for the majority of his career, he's been one of the better fighters in 2 divisions, and for the latter half of his career, he's pretty much been no worse than the number 2 fighter, and even most people didn't think he lost to Henry Cejudo, so some people could say he's still the number 1 fighter. If he was in the UFC right now, would I take him over Aljamain Sterling? Yeah. Would I take him over Peter Yan? At worst, 50-50. But over the majority of people, even at bantamweight, I still say Demetrius Johnson is much better fighter, much better resume, much broader skill set, much more refined skill set. I can't name 2 fighters in the division below or the division he's at who are just better all-around technicians with a better sense of pacing and a better ability to control the pace and dictate where the fight takes place. So it's greatness, and people usually tune in to see greatness, even if it's not, maybe it won't do a huge number, but there's going to be a certain amount of interest. There'll be a lot of fighters who will pay attention to this fight because for a period of time, he was the gold standard, and everybody wants to see greatness. That's why you saw Roy Jones versus Mike Tyson. They're not great anymore, but maybe you're just hoping to see a brief glimpse of greatness. You see, when Jordan was with the Wizards, you know he's not the same Jordan, but maybe he'll have one of those 40-point nights, and you just want to see it. You want to see the old Mike back for a second. People pay to see greatness, and he's a great fighter. He's a great fighter. He'll go down as probably one of the top 10, if not top 4 fighters in the world as far as skill set, accomplishment, consistency, and physical ability.
So he's 34 years old, and he's been openly talking about retirement as well. There was a piece that came out this week, I believe, with him talking about that. If he wins this title on Wednesday, where does he sit on your GOAT list? For me, he's easily top 5. I mean, maybe you put Jones, Fedor, GSP ahead of him, but outside of those 3, he's easily top 4 or 5 for me.
Yeah, he'd have to be. Just like I said, based off of the variety of skills he's shown, his consistency as a fighter, the fact that he was number 1 and number 2 at 2 different weight classes. He's competed in 2 major organizations. If he wins the title, that means he's won a belt in 2 major organizations. Very few fighters have shown the range of skill and the depth of skill that he's shown. He doesn't have the names on his resume. You know, I mean, he's got Benavidez, he's got Cejudo. Who else has he got? He doesn't really have a lot of names.
Like, you have to go back to look at his whole. He has Damasio Page, who was a strong name back then. He has Kid Yamamoto, Miguel Torres, Ian McCall, Joseph Benavidez. He has Ali Bagotinov, who was a big name, who people thought he was going to be a champion before he started failing drug tests. You have Kyoji Horiguchi. He stopped Henry Cejudo. So.
Well, I mean, like he's got a lot of names, but one of the things that separates Jones is Jones has a bunch of established Hall of Famers: Rashad Evans, Quentin Rampage Jackson, Shogun Rua. Like, those 3 alone are better than almost everybody's career because they dominated their weight classes. Like, they were at one point they were other pound for pound best type guys. Joseph Benavidez has never been a top 5 pound for pound best guy. At one point, Shogun Rua was. At one point, Quentin Rampage Jackson was considered one, and Jones has very dominant wins over both of them. Even Daniel Cormier at one point was considered a top 5, top pound for pound guy, and Jones has got 2 victories over him. So it's not so much that Jones is a better fighter, or he's shown that he's been able to maintain his peak as far as the level of his performances, but he just has like you got 4 Hall of Famers right there. 2 guys who won who won championships in different divisions, different organizations, who've been stopped by him on a routine basis. That's what separates him. Same thing with Fedor. Fedor's got a bunch of Hall of Fame guys on his list. Demetrius Johnson has a lot of really, really good guys, a couple of maybe Hall of Fame guys, but not like top 5 guys. I mean, Fedor's got wins over other, most of the great heavyweights of his time. He's got wins over. Frank Mir, even though it's faded, Frank Mir, Crow Cop, Minotauro, Nogueira, Fabricio Verdum. He's just like, there's 4 of the best heavyweights of all time. Jones has beat 4 of the best light heavyweights of all time. I think that's what will put him behind. But if you go just based on what you see in the actual skill set, he's probably number 1. I mean, if you go by straight up skills, only Fedor shown better, but even Fedor kind of threw his skills away to be more of a puncher. But if you go by just pure skills and controlling fights and fighting different styles, it's Mighty Mouse going away. Nobody else has shown the range and the depth of skills he's shown. But they're not going to go by that. He'll probably be, like you said, 4 or 5.
So we're also talking about some of the other greatest fighters of all time. And Eddie Alvarez is also fighting, former UFC champion, former Bellator champion as well. He's not fighting for the title, but he's facing a top contender in the co-main event. Iluri Lepisis, if I'm saying that wrong, I apologize. Where does Eddie sit on your list of top lightweights of all time? I've seen a lot of different debates about where he fits in. For me, I could see him sitting around in the top 5 position as well, maybe top 3 to 4, definitely top 5. But where does he sit for you?
The biggest thing with Eddie Alvarez has been how many organizations he's fought in, and how many world-class guys he's faced. That's the thing that really separates him, the length of his career, and the fact that he's managed to stay mostly in a world-class level as a fighter. I mean, it's very hard to his loss to McGregor it's pretty bad, to be quite honest. He just got crushed. He wasn't competitive. He couldn't touch McGregor. And this was Eddie Alvarez coming off of one of the very best wins of his career, and he got dominated. I mean, it wasn't he just smoked him. And we can talk about wrong fighting style, wrong strategy. The fact is he couldn't do anything with Conor. Conor made it look easy. He fought Dustin Poirier. The first fight, it would be no contest. He probably would have won that if he wouldn't have fouled him. But the second fight, he got totally dominated once again. So he's had some pretty big losses, but mostly I would say, I don't know if I can give him top 5. Maybe top 7. Top 7 to 10 is where I would give him. He's had some really impressive wins, but he's had some really, really devastating, fairly one-sided losses that kind of make you wonder about it. The biggest thing he has going for him is he's fought all over the world. Pretty much he's fought everybody. So it's hard to really say he's not at least top 7. But I just feel there's some limitations in his game, and I feel that he's had some losses that just really make it hard for me to say that this guy meets the bar of dominance. I mean, in the UFC where they have the best fighters, for a period of time, BJ Penn dominated. Khabib Nurmagomedov dominated. Eddie Alvarez never really had that. He never, as a champion. As a champion, when the stakes were the highest, he got blown out in a fairly one-sided fashion. That doesn't mean he's a terrible fighter, but you definitely can't put him at 1, 2, or 3. I mean, I'd say even Frankie Edgar had a better run at 155 than Eddie Alvarez. So that's 1, 2, or 3. He's out. Who do you got? 4.
I think when you look at Alvarez's run, like you said, he's fought everywhere and he's fought a bunch of people. I mean, he's beat Justin Gaethje, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Former champion, title challenger. He beat RDA.
Yep.
Former champion.
Anthony Pettis.
He fought for a belt at welterweight as well. Anthony Pettis, former champion. Gilbert Melendez, former champion. He split with Michael Chandler, who's fighting for the belt, former champion. He beat Shinya Aoki. He split with him as well, too, former champion. Beat Pat Curran, another former champion. I mean, he's beaten a lot of guys. Kawajiri, another former champion. He's beaten a lot of guys that it's almost as if you were watching MMA in the early days, you would definitely see Alvarez as a bigger name than if you were just watching since like 2010.
Yeah, his longevity is really what stands out, because part of the reason he has all those wins is because he's been able to do it over basically 2 different decades of fighting.
Almost 20 years.
20. Yeah, it's his longevity. And I'm not saying he hasn't been effective. It's just I don't know if I put him in that top three. I mean, it's really hard for me to put him in that top three. Like you get to 5 to 7, I think we have a fair amount of discussion. But in that 1 through 3 position, I just can't do it. I can't put him over BJ Penn. I can't put him over Khabib Nurmagomedov. I don't know that I can put him over Frankie Edgar just because Frankie Edgar was able to defend the title on multiple occasions. I'd probably say he's better than Chandler. Justin Gaethje hasn't really won a title in a major organization. Chandler has one, but they split their fight. So maybe you put him in 4 or 5, something like that, between 4 and 7. But yeah, I still say he's between 4 and 7. The first 3, just off their runs in the UFC, before and after they won the title, I'd have to put them above him, in my opinion.
Good stuff. Let me ask you this question, because what's interesting to me about this card on Wednesday is, as I said, it's the first time one championship will be on TNT, and it's coming on after pro wrestling. If you or anyone that's watching doesn't follow, there's a new wrestling promotion called All Elite Wrestling that has a show on Wednesdays from 8 to 10. That's been having pretty strong success. So much so that the WWE actually moved their show on Wednesday to no longer compete with them. So they should be drawing in a good 700,000 to 900,000 viewers on Wednesdays pretty consistently now. I'm curious and interested to see how many people stick around to watch this fight on TNT afterwards, because they've been showing promos leading into the last 2 weeks or so, and I'm sure that they'll have some during the show tomorrow night as well. Schwan, do you think a lot of people will stick around, or will the numbers drop off because it's a weekday?
I think that's the reason they're using Eddie Alvarez and Demetrius Johnson, because they fairly recently fought in the UFC and they're recognizable names. I think Sage Norcut's on that fight card too, right?
I think so. I'm looking at
Aoki. He's fighting.
I feel like he was originally supposed to be, but he's not listed anymore.
Okay, well, I think that's why they're using them, because they're guys who are very well known, partly due to the UFC, partly due to themselves, and they're trying to use that to leverage it a little bit to get more of a share of the people watching it. So I don't know what an acceptable number is. I don't know what's considered a big number. I just know that whatever they would have done without these guys wouldn't have been comparable or wouldn't have been anything of note. That's why they're having these guys so high up on the card. I think it'll be a good number. I think enough people will tune in. There's MMA fans, but I don't know that the UFC fans, the majority of them, are going to tune into it. Some of them will, because they're familiar with Eddie Alvarez, they're familiar with Demetrius Johnson. I don't know that it'll be a majority, because once again, anything outside of the UFC's realm or sphere seems to suffer a little bit as far as coverage and overall numbers. I'm hoping the wrestling. I'm hoping for a good number, because it's the best thing for the fighters moving forward. If there's some competition and they can make not just a living, but have the support of the fans and other organizations. It's risky the day they're doing it on, but I mean, I guess at this point, you got to take the openings when you can. You can't go head to head with the UFC, because they usually beat you just off of name brand recognition alone.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to the most, to see what that number looks like after Wednesday's pro wrestling. I think it'll be an interesting tell of what they will be doing going forward, because they have some U.S. names that they can maybe book around. Gary Tunin, Tom DeBlas is still on the roster. Like you said, Sage is still there as well. I wouldn't be surprised if they go after Page or something like that. So they have some names around that could probably make it work. There were some pretty interesting fight announcements this week that we're going to touch on quickly. Angela Hill and Amanda Ribas. I think this is an intriguing fight. I'm looking at Ribas to get the win initially, even though everyone knows Angela Hill is my homie. Like, love that fighter. But I'm more concerned about if Hill will be able to keep the fight on the feet for 3 rounds, 15 minutes. Because the second it goes to the ground, she's going to be in a lot of trouble with Ribas on top of her.
Yeah, I mean, Ribas got knocked out pretty spectacularly. But recently, Angela Hill has been fighting more controlled, and she really is dominant. She looked against Ashley Yoder in some other fights. She doesn't look just dynamic as a striker, as punishing as a striker as you would expect her to be, given how good an athlete she is. So it really comes down to how Ribas has recovered from that knockout. If she's 100% good, her confidence is good, her mind's good, it's going to be hard for me to imagine that Angela Hill beats her, because, like you said, Hill's not great on the ground, and even if Hill survives, once Hill's biggest wins have come when she's had a physical advantage of some sort over somebody. Against Hebus, I don't know that she's stronger than her. I don't know that she hits a lot harder than her. I don't know that her hands are faster than her. I know she's not as good a wrestler. I know she's not as good a grappler. But athletically, she can't control where the fight takes place like she usually does. She can't just throw you off on a sprawl. She can't just shove your head down and pull her leg out. She can't just reverse herself or muzzle herself in and out of positions. And Hebus is, as young as she is, still fights with a fairly seasoned approach to it. So it really seems like it's a showcase fight for her against a girl who has a hard time finishing and a hard time against women with balanced skill sets. I mean, it's really Hebus's fight to lose. But having been stopped before, it gives Angela it's gonna create interest in that fight because they're gonna be like, has she recovered from the knockout? If she's recovered from it, it'll be a competitive fight, but it's gonna be a clear win for Hebus. If she hasn't, then he'll have the biggest win of her career. But this is a pretty important fight for Hill. Hill needs to win this kind of fight. She rarely does. She rarely wins these kind of fights, and that's the unfortunate part about this.
Very true. Very true. We also have Korean Zombie versus Dan Ige. This is the fight that most everyone is excited about. Let me ask you, Schwan, is this Ige's will this be his statement victory, or will Korean Zombie remain as one of those top contenders?
I mean, Korean Zombie, for the most part, has only lost to really good fighters, really good athletes. Dan Ige, to me, isn't a really good athlete. He's not a particularly skillful fighter. Like he can grapple a little bit, he can strike a little bit. He's more of he's tough, he's durable, he forces the pace, he can touch on different ranges. I don't know what he does where he dominates. Is he a dominant wrestler? I don't think so. Dominant striker? Not really. Dominant grappler? Haven't really seen that either. He's kind of like pretty good in multiple ranges, but he's very aggressive, he's very tough, and he's willing to force a pace and force exchanges, whether it's on the feet, on the ground, or wrestling exchanges. I don't know where he beats a Korean Zombie at. Even though Korean Zombie had that loss against Yair Rodriguez, he would have won that fight in like 3 more seconds. That fight was won for him. That was like, I don't want to say a fluke because Yair did a real technique, but that's as fluky a win as you're going to get. And even losing against Brian Ortega is one of the better athletes in the division, and Brian Ortega is one of the more durable fighters. And Brian Ortega, nobody knew what to expect from him. He hadn't been in the cage in like 2 years. He came back a brand new guy. If Korean Zombie loses to Ige, we can pretty much stop talking about him as an elite competitor and start talking about him as a journeyman. Because I have a lot of respect for Ige. I just don't think Ige is particularly great. Calvin Kattar took him apart, and Calvin Kattar is not a great fighter technically either. Not even as a striker. He's overrated as a boxer and a striker. But he took Ige apart fairly convincingly. So if Korean Zombie can't beat him and beat him in fairly dominant fashion, then he's got another problem. He's probably officially a journeyman, and it's going to be just being a stepping stone for contenders or a temperature or mark, see if the contenders are ready to make the next step. But I favor Korean Zombie. Better fighter, better athlete, more experience, better results against better opposition.
And then the last one is the Chris Cyborg Leslie Smith rematch. And as you know, they fought once in the UFC. That was Chris Cyborg's introduction to the Octagon. So they're fighting again, and they're fighting at Bellator 259 for that title. Do you see this fight going any differently?
I mean, it should go a little bit differently, just because Leslie Smith should have an idea of the strength and the physicality of Cyborg. Also, Cyborg's not the same. Cyborg's lost a step, maybe lost 2 steps, which doesn't impact her as much because she was like 3 or 4 steps ahead of people. So even if she's lost 2 steps, I mean, she's 2 steps ahead of people instead of 4. Smith's got really good conditioning. She fights at a very high rate. She's using more of a balanced striking skill set. But the fact of the matter is, defensively, she's not great. She does not hit very hard. And even though Cyborg isn't an explosive, snappy kind of puncher, she's a clubbing, like physically move you around and control you and break you down puncher. And I don't know that Smith can handle that. Smith's biggest thing is getting her volume, getting her momentum. I don't even know how she gets past Cyborg's jab if Cyborg uses it. Cyborg's jab and low kicks alone should pretty much make this fight as easy as she wants it to be. The only difference is, unlike the other girls who kind of concede and cover up and back off, you're going to have to punish Smith. You're going to have to break her down. You're probably going to have to stop her to get her to stop fighting you. Whereas the other girls, once Cyborg started putting shots together and physically dominating them, I don't want to say they quit. That's very insulting. But they didn't really have any answers. And when they didn't have technical answers, they're not the type of fighter just to put their head down and just swing back. Leslie Smith, if nothing else, will fight back. So if Cyborg should win. She's a better technician as far as I've seen, more experience, better competition, bigger, stronger, better athlete. She loses to Leslie Smith, and that's probably, no offense against Smith, that's probably the worst loss of her career, to be quite honest. You're mute. Take it off yet?
Yep, I figured I was doing well so far, but I mean, you say it's Cyborg's worst loss. She's only lost twice. Once to Nunez, and in her very first fight, like her literal very first fight, is the only other fight she ever lost. So I mean, yeah, you could really.
Only because at that point, Nunes was the best bantamweight and still one of the best athletes and biggest hitters. And at one point, basically, he was number 2 in women's fighting behind Cyborg. Leslie Smith isn't in anybody's top 5 pound for pound for women. I don't know that she's top 5, and she'd be top 5 bantamweight in the UFC. So I'm not saying she's not tough. I'm not saying she's not dangerous, but there's a difference between there's a different caliber of fighters, and the UFC still has a better caliber of fighters and women's fighters than Bellator. And Leslie Smith wouldn't be a top 5 bantamweight. She'd probably be like top 7, but she wouldn't be a top 5. Well, what does she do? She strikes, she throws volume, she can grapple a little bit. Not a great wrestler, not a knockout puncher. So what does she knock Cyborg out? That's telling you Cyborg's chin is no longer there. That's not a good sign, because that's a lot of her thing. When she takes her down, out wrestles her. Tanya Evinger couldn't do it, but now Leslie Smith does. That means Cyborg's declined to the point where she can't even defend takedowns and out wrestle someone who's smaller and weaker than her, and probably not as good a wrestler. It's just a fight where she has all the advantages. So even though Leslie Smith is the kind of fighter who can make it tough, she's not the kind of fighter you lose to. She just makes it tougher than it has to be. You take a couple licks you shouldn't. You have to fight a little bit harder. You might have to work a little bit harder, but she shouldn't beat her. This would be a fairly tough fight because she's tough, not technically tough, but physically tough. Not a truly competitive fight.
So yeah, I'm always been interested in Leslie Smith just because the bigger her platform gets, the more she can speak out in support of fighters. So it should be an interesting contest when we get around there. Schwan, we're going to turn to boxing for a little bit. We don't have much for boxing to talk about because there isn't anything really exciting maybe until May 8th, where Alvarez and Billy Joe Saunders fight. But I know you're excited about Jake Paul and Ben Askren next week. But what are some of the things that you're looking forward to when it comes to the square circle?
Well, Jamal Herring, he beat Peter Frampton this week. Frampton's pretty much done.
That uppercut was nice. I like that, that sneaky uppercut that he caught him with, because it looked like somebody was demonstrating how to throw a proper uppercut, and it almost doesn't even seem like it hits, but it was such a clean knockdown.
Yeah, Herring's got a great story as a Marine and the issues he had with his children, and he's a good guy. He's a solid fighter. He's good technically. Seems very disciplined. I don't know that he's the greatest athlete. I don't even know that he's the greatest fighter. He's a very good, very well prepared, always in condition, always ready to go. Seems very mentally strong. I don't know that he has necessarily the talent of an Oscar Valdez. I don't know if he has the talent of a Shakur Stevenson or guys of that nature. But he's always well prepared. He's always he's well conditioned. He's well schooled. So I guess maybe the next fight would possibly be him versus Shakur Stevenson. Him versus Oscar Valdez could be a possibility, and I'd be excited to see either one of those fights. I'd rather see Stevenson or Valdez fight one another, but I would settle for seeing Herring fight either one of those guys. He'd probably fight Oscar Valdez for a title unification belt, and whoever wins that will probably fight Shakur Stevenson in theory. Outside of that, of course, there's a Jake Paul Ben Askren fight. I really think a lot of people are sleeping on Ben Askren. I like Jake Paul. He can fight. He seems like a guy. He's a very good marketer. He's making money for other fighters by putting him on his card. He's a great eye for business. But the fact of the matter is, I've seen multiple fights of his, and when he's swinging, he falls into clinches really well because he mistimes the distance and is either short or long, and he gets into clinches. If Ben Askren gets his hands on him in a clinch, Ben Askren's going to beat the hell out of him. Like, Paul's very strong. He's very athletic, but he's beating up a YouTuber and a retired basketball player. He hasn't fought a legitimate fighter. And I know Ben Askren is not a boxer, but he's still a fighter. Jake Paul's not a fighter. He's been beating up on non-fighters, and I'm sure he beats up on guys in sparring, and that might be all well and good. But my question is, how do you look that good in sparring and then fight guys who were worse than your sparring partners and never look as dominant? He didn't look all. I don't know what everybody's talking about. It was a bad knockout against Nate Robinson. He didn't look great. Jake Paul did not look great, and Jake Paul did not look great against the first YouTube fighter he fought. So is he athletic? Does he hit hard? Sure, but Ben Askren been hit hard before. He's been kneed, he's been kicked, he's been punched by Robbie Lawler. And if it gets into those clinches, if they go around and the ref lets him fight and he can clinch and hit him to the body and just tie him up, after that first round, I don't think Jake Paul will have anything left. If it goes, I don't know if he can go 8 rounds. If he doesn't get the knockout in the first round or two, I don't think his power carries. I don't think he wins the fight. And to be quite honest, there's no pressure on Ben Askren. He seems very level-headed. He doesn't seem egotistical about this at all. If he wins, he wins. He loses, he loses. He's kind of accepted it. Jake Paul's the one who's been talking the stuff, and Jake Paul's the one who's going to be facing the best opposition he's ever faced in his life. And yeah, I know it's boxing, but Jake Paul's not a real boxer. No offense to him. He's beating up a YouTuber and a basketball player. Now, they were live fights, but if you've done MMA, you've probably sparred boxing with people who are better than Nate Robinson and the YouTuber. I know I've sparred like Golden Glove winners and guys who've been nationally ranked in boxing. I've sparred better people than he's fought. Not saying that means I whoop his ass. I'm not saying that, but the level of opposition hasn't been particularly good. So I don't know what to take from it. You beat up Nate Robinson. Okay, well, let's say I submitted Roger Federer. So now I'm going to grapple Damian. I'm going to fight Damian Maia. So I submitted Federer, so I should have him. I guess, I kickboxed who? Phil Mickelson, and I knocked him out. So now I'm going to fight Damian Maia, and I'm just going to light him up on the feet. It's not how it works. Even if you're better than the pro is a pro for a reason. There's kind of a gap between y'all. So that's what I think about that.
We'll probably talk about this more next week because the fight's scheduled for next week, and it'll be in a rundown item. I'm just going to give you an early preview of my thoughts. I hope they both knock each other the fuck out at the same time. Period. Like that's what I want to see. If you can tell me, I will give them however much money that pay-per-view costs, if they could promise me that they'll knock each other the fuck out at the same time, and then I can turn it off and go to bed a happy man. That's all I want.
I'm happy for people to have another avenue to get paid, because any combat sport, any person who does it has my respect. It's hard to make money. If you can find a way to make some money and do it legally without causing anybody any problems, I'm all for it. Hey, do your thing. The one other thing I want to talk about as far as boxing was Adrian Broner. He seems to have drawn a line in the sand. He wants to fight in the next 10 to 12 weeks, and I don't know that they have any space for him to fight, especially against the caliber of guy he's going to be fighting on his way back, because Adrian Broner demands a fairly high amount of money. He's supposed to be more of a draw, but he wasn't in his recent fight. So do you want to pay him $2 to $5 million to fight somebody who's maybe an average level fighter? You want to pay him that much to fight a name fighter, but right now I don't know that he's ready for a name fighter. He needs more fights. But he seems to be drawing a line in the sand where he wants to be active or he wants to be let go. And I don't know how honest he is about that. But like he said, I get in trouble when I'm not fighting routinely. And if he's not fighting 10 weeks from now, that's going to be like, what, almost 3-4 months where he hasn't been fighting? That's not good for a guy who tends to routinely get in trouble. So it's going to be interesting to kind of watch that and see how that develops.
True. So I got a train passing by, so yeah, that'll be a frequent thing. But you talk about people making money. This week is WrestleMania week, and there's literally Pro Wrestling Schwan from yesterday through next Wednesday. So it's going to be a long, arduous week with me and being belligerent and covering all the pro wrestling I could possibly cover. Have you ever watched a WrestleMania?
Oh, I've been to one. One in Houston. I went to when I think it was The Rock and Stone Cold.
17? Was it the one where Vince McMahon turned on him at the end?
I think so, if I remember. It was years ago. My an old friend of mine, his dad worked at this mattress store, and he got us tickets. And then he got tickets for another one in Bad Blood in Houston. I think Brock Lesnar got thrown out on the floor in front of us, so we got to kick him a couple times. So, and then it was a funny story. We got those because my friend was friends with the girl whose uncle was the Undertaker, and he got his front row tickets. Like we were front row, like right there on the floor in front of him. Like everybody was walking past us and everything. It's pretty cool.
So yeah, this is it's been a full year since they've had fans in attendance, and we're not gonna talk too much about pro wrestling tonight, so bear with us. But this is their first event having fans back in a whole year. They're in Tampa. They're gonna have 25,000 for the show on Saturday, and 25,000 for the show on Sunday. How soon do you think the UFC will do an event outside with a big crowd like that? Because they have that event coming up in Florida, I believe, with 15,000. How far are we away from an outside UFC event with that large of a crowd?
We can't be that far from it. I mean, Dana's chomping at the bit. He wants it. I mean, some of these fights that they've had recently have done great on pay-per-view, and he's probably thinking about all the money he's lost out because he couldn't have people in attendance. I mean, the Gaethje versus Ferguson fight, he lost a ton of money because people weren't there. Gaethje versus Khabib would have been a huge fight. Khabib versus Conor McGregor did not have a crowd, like a real crowd for that, like a real overpaying ESPN's there. Like it's hurting the bottom line, and it's hurting kind of the impact because you see these fights and they don't carry as much weight when you don't have fans there. I know fighters like it because they can hear everything clearly, but there's a certain magic when you see a knockout of the year and the fans are seeing it too. It's like it's just an energy that gets everybody swept up into it. It probably makes for a worse product in certain aspects, but it makes it much better as far as the experience and communicating that emotion when a fight happens. So he's already exploring every option. Fighters' health be damned. He's going to get these people in to watch these fights happen.
Yeah, I think it's gonna happen sooner rather than later, and I just hope we stay safe. Like you can't trust it, but we got to figure out a way to keep as many people safe.
Yeah, there's one thing I wanted to talk about before we go. I saw something on Twitter, and I don't know who posted it. I apologize for not remembering this, but somebody was talking about the Jones Dana White issue, and they made a very good point. They said Jones $8 to $10 million to fight Francis Ngannou is actually too little for Jones. He's in his right mind to want $25-50 million. They say that makes sense considering the fact he's never lost, like really officially lost. He's one of the most dominant champions. He has a fan base. His pay-per-views sell very well. Every time you mention Jones on a website, it's hits, it's clicks. But they said it's not that he's not worth it. It's just the risk that comes with John Jones because we've had to cancel events. We've had to move events from one arena to another arena. We've had multiple fights get canceled or pushed out of bounds. And as much money he's made the UFC, he's lost the UFC just as much money with his drug issue, with his issue outside the running into the phone pole, with issue with the pregnant woman. It's like he's cost him as much as he's made. So has he earned the right to make that money? Yes, but due to his lack of dependability or consistency, you can't invest that kind of money in because you don't know what the hell's going to happen.
So I'm gonna say this, and John Nash, I think he wrestled Bloody Elbow, I believe, but he is a very good resource for these type of conversations. Just because of the ESPN deal alone, UFC is going to make $500 million this year, meaning all of their shows are already paid for. All of the shows for the whole year are already paid for. That doesn't include any pay-per-view buys, any gates they'll be getting, any sponsorship money that they'll be getting. All of their events are already paid for. If you look at if this show did a $750 million or $750,000 pay-per-view buys, if they keep the price at $79 a pay-per-view buy, just back of the napkin math, they would make about $60 million off of that show from a pay-per-view standpoint, not including the live gate, not including sponsorships. So if we include those two numbers in, it could easily be 75 million. So he could get 8, 10, 15 million. They could pay him that, and it would be perfectly fine. They would not have to bat an eye at that. The issue is they pay John Jones that. Then you're going to have Amanda Nunez asking for more money. You're going to have Conor asking for more money. Dustin. They don't want to have to deal with that. And I mean, that's the situation that we're in.
I always see those guys demanding more money because Amanda Nunez could be like, I haven't cost you as much as this fool's cost you. Conor McGregor can say, if anything, I always show up. My knee was tore when I fought Chad Mendes. I was in 100% to fight. I shouldn't be fighting Khabib right out of the gate, but y'all wanted me to, so I did it. This dude cost y'all money, tons of money in events. I'm not saying they don't have the money, but their thing is to make as much money as they can on top of the guaranteed money. And with Jones, you just never know what's going to happen. You honestly don't. What if he beats Ngannou and then he he pisses hot. Oh my god, dude.
I mean, Connor almost ruined the whole event when he threw a dolly through a window and
Yeah,
injured 3 people.
and then they turned that into a marketing point and made
So
all
they
their.
can do whatever they want to do, and like they could easily pay John Jones his money.
I think they should pay him. It's just when somebody made that point, I said I can respect. It's like paying a football player who's always getting in trouble, misses a bunch of games. Yeah, his talent says he's worth 25 million, but damn, dude, he misses. He only plays 7 games out of the season, and he's always in trouble. Like I can't give 25 million to someone who's so unreliable. And Jones's unreliability is not an excuse, but that's a point that Jones haters and people who are on the side of the UFC are going to point to. Hey, look, he's not dependable. Maybe if he'd shown up for all his fights and not all these issues, maybe they'd give him his money. We both know they wouldn't, but they have a legitimate argument now that they can point to, in my opinion.
So something that somebody can't argue about, though, Schwan, is the longevity of this show, man. We are at 200 episodes, and I was trying to look back through the records today, and I couldn't even find where it started. The most recent video, or the earliest video on our YouTube channel was like episode 162, and that was back in 2019. So we've been doing this for at least going on 4 to 5 years now. And I first and foremost want to thank everybody who's taking the time to watch this show. We have about 350 subscribers to this channel. Some of our shows get 50 views. Some of our shows get 25. We have some on this channel that have 500, 1,000. We have one that has almost 15,000 for some odd reason. But anyone who's taken the time to click on our content and watch one of our shows, whether it be this or the pro wrestling podcast that we do or the interview series that we do, I want to first and foremost say thank you for that. Schwan, what are some of your favorite memories or highlights from doing the show?
Favorite memories and highlights. I'd probably say one of them would have been when we've had guests on, like I enjoyed when I talked to we had Trevor Whitman on, and I was joking about how me and Pat Barry had beef, and he was just laughing about that. That was just kind of fun seeing another side of him. Talking to Arlene Sanchez was big because it's giving a female coach, which there are very few of in the mixed martial arts, and she was a world-class coach, had direct 2 world champions. That was a very big thing to me. And then I can't remember all the shows, but shows wherever we picked up sets, like Eddie Alvarez with RDA or Misha Tate over Holly Holm, like fights nobody else saw coming, or Rousey, Holly Holm over Rousey, like fights that people were just totally against, like y'all are idiots. What are you talking about? You don't know nothing. And then some of the biggest upsets of that year or in the past couple years, we call them on our show. The decline of Luke Rockhold and Chris Weidman, people were calling us idiots for months and years because I kept saying it. And then both of them fell off. And then it's like people are just like, now when I say something crazy, people are like, they still disagree, but they disagree with some respect because they know I call all these upsets. They know we call the upsets. And it's fun when I can go after the thing and be like, if you would listen to MMA ratings, you would have known that Rose Namajunas was going to knock out Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Or you would have known that Eddie Alvarez was going to stop RDA. Or you would have known that because we said that. We said that like 6 days before.
Yeah, it's great. I wish I could go back to find episodes where I talked about Amanda Nunes and Holly Holm being able to beat Ronda Rousey, because I've had multiple people apologize to me for that, just because the fact that we pointed it out long before it actually happened. So that is something that I can honestly say that I really enjoy. We've been doing this show for so long, and I think there's the longevity of it that you brought to the table as well has been fantastic. Because if it was just me, I'm not sure how much longer I would have been doing it. But we've had Roy across the pond, Billington, who is a great grappling editor. I think he's a grappling editor for Bloody Elbow now. He was the co-host with me for a while. We had Mike did a couple episodes. The original website owner, he did a few episodes as well too. But you've been here side by side with me for a long time. So I want to say you're appreciated, sir. And let's knock out 200 more.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you. Like I said, you all offered me the chance to be on the forum and kind of get to speak freely. I've been on other shows, and because they have certain ties, I have to watch what I say, and I come over here and I can essentially say whatever I want. If I get too crazy, then you're like, I get a text on my phone like, oh, okay, yeah, that guy is a really good fighter. I didn't mean any of that. So it's really cool that I get to have a forum, and like I said, I consider you and Mike really good friends. I've probably stayed in touch with you two more than I've stayed in touch with people I know the majority of my life. So It's like having two more friends, and I just like knowing what's going on with you guys. Made me feel like part of the family. And as far as the show, one last thing I wanted to say is, whenever we've had like knowledgeable people on here, Steve Kim, Trevor Whitman, Marcus Davis, Arlene Sanchez, Stephen Wright, like all the people who are coaches who really know what they're talking about, or people who manage fighters, they've always complimented us on how prepared we are and how well we know the sport and how respectful we are and how knowledgeable we are about the workings of the sport. Like, that means a lot to me because a lot of people do a lot of let's be funny and let's joke and let's stroke their egos, and we ask real questions and we make real points. We don't agree with everything they do. Told Trevor Whitman I didn't agree with something he did with Rose. Told Arlene Sanchez I didn't agree with something she did with Nico Montana. But they didn't get bothered by it because we did it respectfully and we had done our research and we watched the fights and we could talk on that cerebral level with them. And that means a lot to me that they respect it, and other guys who really know the sport in MMA respect what we do and respect the show. Like a lot of guys, when I've been on other shows, they've always said they like what we do, the quality of the show we have. And that means a lot to me,
Good stuff, man. I definitely appreciate that, Schwan. And like I said, here's to 200 more. We're going to go ahead and close out, and we'll be back here next week. Again, as usual, you can check me out at rgarcia_sports, Schwan Humes at Black Jordan Green, and look up MMA ratings anywhere and everywhere to find all of our content. Let's shout out Adam Martin as well, because he does a lot of work for the podcast as well, or the site itself. We got to get him on the show as well sometime in the future. But we'll be back next week, and everyone have a great weekend and stay safe.
Yes, everybody have a great evening.